تحياتي واهلا بيكم معايا في حلقه جديده على قناه ايجيكاست. حلقه النهارده في غايه الاهميه، هنتكلم فيها عن موضوع عقود العمل للعماله الغير ماهره، فيزا الاي بي 3 اللي بتدي جرين كارد على طول، بتطلع من بلدك من الشرق الاوسط انت واسرتك واخد الجرين كارد. النهارده الحلقه الرابعه مع افضل شركه عماله في امريكا، الوسيط المشهور جدا بي دي في سولوشنز. رجع معانا كريس ريتشاردسون علشان نشوف ايه اخر الاخبار ونساله شويه اسئله زياده لكل الناس اللي لسه بيفكروا في موضوع الاي بي 3، علشان اللي عنده القدره انه ياخد الخطوه ما يترددش اكتر من كده. ولكن طبعا قبل ما ندخل في تفاصيل الحلقه ونبدا في الاسئله، بحب ارحب بكريس ريتشاردسون. كريس, thank you so much for taking the time to come back on the channel.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, so that you and I can try to help our friends from the Middle East maybe make up their mind and see if the EB3 will be a good option for them. So let's jump right in, Chris, and I'm going to start with my first question. For those who do not know what is EB3 is all about, can you maybe take a minute or a minute and a half to just explain the process real quick?
Sure. Thank you for having me again. I always tell people the best way to think about our immigration system or the United States immigration system is there's two types of ways you can become an immigrant or move to work and live in the United States permanently. One is through your family. Let's say you're married to an American, or your parents are an American, or your child's an American, or you can do it through employment-based or your job. And so among the job category, there are 5 different types of visas, and we break it down into employment-based. That's what EB stands for, employment-based. There's EB1, and that's for like the Einsteins, the super duper superheroes, the super doctors, not just a regular old doctor, but super doctor, right? Like that's called the Einstein visa almost. That's EB1. And then EB2 is for you're still pretty good. You're like a doctor, you're a high level doctor, or you're in the national interest of the United States. So that's EB2, employment based 2. And then we have something called EB3. And EB3 are for people who are skilled workers or professional workers, or called other workers, and that's EB3 unskilled. So you have EB3 skilled, you have EB3 unskilled. Skilled workers are people requiring a minimum of 2 years of training or experience. Professionals are those who require at least a bachelor's degree, a U.S. equivalent of a bachelor's degree. But then you have people who are the unskilled labor. And unskilled labor means people whose jobs require less than 2 years of training or experience and not temporary or seasonal in nature. And so that's what EB3 stands for. It's people who want to move to the United States to work in jobs that require less than 2 years experience. And so if you can find a job at a manufacturing plant, or a job at a restaurant, or a job at a car wash, for example, and that job requires less than 2 years experience, you can move and live and work in the United States.
سألت كريس عن ايه هي بالظبط معنى الامبلويمنت بيست ايميجريشن، انك تهاجر للولايات المتحدة عن طريق عقد عمل، وقال لنا طبعا ان عقود العمل هي تاني طريقة بعد الاقارب او الزواج من مواطن امريكي، او ان يبقى مامتك او باباك معاهم الجنسية يقدروا يدوها لك. عقود العمل هتكون مناسبة جدا ليك وانواعها مختلفة، بداية من EB1 الكاتيجوري الاولاني للناس اللي هم النابغة، زي اينشتاين ما بيقول، حد يعني معدي في كل حاجه زي احمد زويل او الناس المشاهير جدا، ساعتها بيقدموا على الاي بي 1. ما بتكونش مناسبه لمعظم الناس. الكاتيجوري الثاني اي بي 2 بيكون مناسب للناس الشاطرين جدا في المجال بتاعهم، حد عامل دكتوراه PhD في حاجه معينه او ماسترز، عنده خبره كبيره، مهم للحكومه الامريكيه، بيجي على الاي بي 2. والاي بي 3 هي مكونه من جزئين. الجزء الاولاني للبروفيشنالز او الناس اللي هم معاهم بكالوريوس، عندهم خبره سنتين في المجال بتاعهم، يقدروا يجوا على الاي بي 3. والجزء الثاني للناس اللي ما عندهاش شهاده علميه كبيره، مجرد معاها ثانويه عامه وخبره اقل من سنتين، بنسميهم العماله الغير ماهره اللي هم الاذر وركرز. وده موضوع حلقه النهارده اللي احنا هنركز عليه النهارده، ازاي تقدر تستغل الفيزا دي علشان تاخد الجرين كارد انت واسرتك وتيجي على امريكا. Thank you so much, Chris, for explaining the process. Now, I want to focus on EB3, other workers, specifically the unskilled workers. And can you walk us through the process from beginning to end, from somebody like contacting BDV? How do they pick the job? What are the next steps until they actually can arrive in the US?
Sure. So when you think about the employment-based process, for the most part, the only way that you can get a job is if there isn't an American who wants that job, right? And then if an American doesn't want that job, then an immigrant is allowed to do that job. But that's all a process, right? And so the best way to think about it is what are the different steps in the process to getting that green card. So for the EB3 unskilled and most of the different visa categories, the first place you have to go is something that we call the Department of Labor in the United States. So this department handles everything from our unemployment statistics and handles our wage and hour disputes between employer and employee, but it also makes sure that the American workers are protected in our immigration system. And so the first thing that an employer is going to do is, and we want to do it and think about the employer as well as the foreign national or the people abroad, but the employer is going to make sure that the wages are okay. So they're going to file for something called the prevailing wage determination. After that, and if you have signed up as a foreign national, we're going to go and make sure that there's no Americans who want that job. And so they're going to go through something called a labor certification process. That's something the employer is going to do. And what they're going to do is they're going to go and try to recruit Americans for the job that you signed up for, right? And so you as the foreign national, you're going to sign up for BDV first. We've already started this process of working with the employer on our end to make sure that there are no Americans who want this job, right? And so while you sign up, you're ready, you're set, we're going to get a bunch of information from you, and then we're going to fill out something called a labor certification. So after the employer goes through that recruitment process and shows that no American wants this job, then we're going to say, okay, you foreign national, we're going to help you go through the labor certification process. And then once that's done, that takes about 13 months these days. After the PERM certification is approved, then the case transfers to the Department of Homeland Security, also known as USCIS. And so what happens there is that they're going to move that approved PERM over to that department in the United States. That department is going to review your application, the petition for the foreign national and the employer. And then once that's approved, we're going to wait for the visa to become available. And when the visa is available, and we'll talk a little bit about the visa bulletin later, but when that visa becomes available, then you would do something called consular processing, wherein your application is going to be reviewed and looked at the embassy. The embassy is going to call you in for an interview. And then after that interview, you're going to come to the United States and start working. Or if you're already living in the United States as a student, if you're on a student visa, for example, you file for something called a 485, I-485, to adjust your status from the student visa, for example, to an immigrant visa.
Awesome. سألت كريس عن العمالة الغير ماهرة، العملية بتمشي ازاي علشان تبقى عارف الخطوات اللي انت هتعدي بيها، وطبعا وضح لي انه في طريقين، في طريق من داخل امريكا لو انت ستودنت او طالب داخل البلد هيبقى ليك اجراءات adjustment of status، تعديل وضع مختلفة عن اللي موجود في بلده في الشرق الاوسط، بيعمل حاجة اسمها counselor processing او بيقدم بقى الملف بتاعه في السفارة. واول خطوة هي انك طبعا بتختار الوظيفة اللي انت عايز تيجي عليها، وكريس وضح لنا ان مهم جدا عند الحكومه الامريكيه ان اي وظيفه، اي عقد عمل موجود في امريكا بيتعرض على الامريكان الاول علشان يضمن حقهم ان الوظائف بتاعتهم ما تتاخدش لناس بره البلد. فاول خطوه هي البيرم سيرتيفيكيشن مع وزاره العمل، بيقدموا الابلكيشن ويثبتوا لوزاره العمل ان ما فيش اي مواطن امريكي حابب ان هو ياخد الشغلانه دي، مفيش، نسبة البطالة في المكان ده 0%، وبيتم الموافقة على البيرم سيرتيفيكيشن على الملف بتاعك من وزارة العمل. عادة بتاخد حوالي من 8 ل 13 شهر زي ما كريس قال، وزي ما المعلومات اللي عندي من الأصدقاء اللي شغالين في الموضوع ده. وبعد كده بيتنقل الملف بتاعك من وزارة العمل Department of Labor ل Department of Homeland Security أو وزارة الهجرة علشان يتم الموافقة من وزارة الهجرة إنه خلاص أنت مستوفي كل الشروط، ووزارة العمل ادت الجرين لايت. بعد كده بننتظر لغاية ما يجي عليك الدور، يبقى في فيزا متاحة بالنسبة لك في في الفيزا بوليتين زيها زي اللوتري وغيرها. اول لما يبقى في فيزا متاحه ساعتها تقدر بقى تقدم وتستفيد من الموضوع وتعمل المقابله في السفاره بتاعتك وتاخد الجرين كارد انت واسرتك وتيجي على امريكا علشان تستلم الشغل. Now I want to move on to the statistic that is available on your website. You guys have managed to obtain about 1,200 visas so far in the last 10 years that you have been in business. I told the folks watching that BDV is the largest company agency to find jobs for people from overseas. And although the number sounds really good, and congratulations on achieving that milestone, but I want to focus on the flip side. I want to know from you very honestly and with a lot of transparency, what was the percentage of refusals? Can you tell us a little bit more about the applications? How many were rejected? How many you had to apply again? And what were some of the reasons why those applications were refused?
Sure. We've been doing this for about 10 years now. And, we've got about 1,200 applications approved so far. And the refusal rate is really, really small, right? Like I would say only about, I'd say like 98, 95% of our cases get approved at the end of the day. The cases that don't get approved, there are a lot of different reasons for that. Some of them weren't necessarily where the applicant didn't tell us everything. If they've traveled to the U.S. before, if you've had like a criminal record before, if you had a health problem before that you didn't let us know about, you didn't disclose that to us, that can lead to a denial. Other denials might be like, let's say the employer ends up changing, and if the employer changes in the consular world, that's something that can lead to a denial. Most of the time you're able to change employers, but some embassies and consulates don't really accept that. And so, those are the primary reasons why you would see a denial. I used to be a U.S. diplomat. I worked as a visa officer, so I've interviewed tens of thousands of applicants. And I also did EB3 unskilled. And the great thing about this company is that, we have such a strong reputation among the embassies and consulates. We work so hard to maintain our relationships and our contacts within these embassies and consulates and with the U.S. government that, we try to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that other agencies go through. We really work hard to make sure that we are the gold standard for EB3 unskilled and that we are the gold standard for immigration processing in general. We have a 95 to 98% approval rate, and I want to push that to 100.
سألت كريس عن انه موجود على الويب سايت بتاعهم ان هم نجحوا في انهم يجيبوا عقود عمل ل 1200 حالة، 1200 شخص جم هم واسرهم من كل انحاء العالم. فحبيت اساله بقى عن الناس اللي بيحصل لها رفض. كويس قوي، احنا معانا ال 1200 100 بس الناس اللي بيحصل لها رفض دي يعني عايزين نعرف ايه الاخبار بتاعتهم. وقال لي انه BDV هي طبعا لها الريادة في السوق الامريكي في هذا الموضوع. وقال لي طبعا انه بحكم كونه موظف سابق في الخارجية الامريكية كان بيعمل طبعا مقابلات مع الناس اللي عندهم ابلكيشنز للاي بي 3 وخلافه وعارفين كويس ازاي ينجحوا الابلكيشن. وقال لي انه الريت او النسبه المئويه بتاعتهم من 95 ل 98% نجاح، وهو دايما بيشتغل عشان يوصل ده ل 100%. وقال لي انه النسبه البسيطه جدا اللي 2-3% بيحصل رفض للابلكيشن بيكون السبب الاساسي هو كذب الشخص في الاستماره. كان عنده مثلا كريمنال ريكورد، يعني كان عنده مثلا قضيه ما اعلنش عنها في البدايه، او عنده مشكله صحيه ظهرت في الكشف الطبي برضو ما شرحهاش في البدايه. حصل نوع من التحايل، نوع من الكذب في بدايه الابلكيشن، وده بيكون اكتر سبب بتترفض بسببه. والسبب الثاني ان ربما انت حبيت تغير الامبلوير. لو جيت قلت لا انا مش عايز اشتغل مع الشركه دي وعايز اشتغل مع شركه ثانيه في الخطوات الاخيره، ده طبعا بيكون سبب اساسي انه الابلكيشن بتاعتك تتغير. فانت بتختار الشركه اللي انت هتشتغل معاها وبتكمل معاها للنهايه. Chris, to my knowledge, you are a frequent visitor to the White House. I know and I hear all the time, and I see the pictures of yourself with staff and the White House, so on and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit more about the updates, policy-related issues as far as employment in the U.S. are you concerned at all about the upcoming elections in November? I want to ask you as a side question, what is your prediction to the elections? Not don't disclose who you're going to vote for, but give us your impression on who do you think is going to win the election, and how do you see the sort of like the landscape as far as employment based? We all heard Trump talking recently about giving the majority of students graduating from U.S. colleges green cards, this and that, maybe increasing the H-1B visas available year after year. So tell us your side from the EB3 world. What do you think is going to happen?
So I'll take your first question about the current White House and the current administration. We've been working with the Biden administration on thinking of new and different ways to shorten this visa retrogression and the visa backlog. You know, there's a huge backlog with both DOL and with USCIS due to retrogression, and so I don't think that Congress is going to be able to fix a lot of these issues. And so I think that there needs to be executive action, whether that be something where you grant parole to people who have pending cases, whether you go back and recapture. So, and we'll talk a little bit about this later with the visa bulletin, but if the government doesn't use its visa numbers, it actually loses them, right? And so there's a movement to recapture all the old numbers for the last 30 years that have been lost and wasted and use those to lessen visa retrogression. So that's a great idea. So we've been talking to the White House just about doing different things that they can do to help mitigate some of the concerns that we have seen around employment-based cases. And I think the White House is pretty receptive to those, especially as we get closer to the election in a couple of months. I do think, though, that, President Trump has said recently a lot of different things about H-1B, and he's also talked about helping students with their visas. But President Trump also said those things in 2016 as well. He made a lot of those same kind of promises about wanting to help legal immigration system, and then he did the exact opposite. And so, my thing is like, when people show you who they are, believe them, right? And so people say a lot of things, but I have to just go by what I saw. And so people ask me all the time, well, how do you think things will change under like a President Trump? And the thing is we've studied EB3, for example, under the different administrations, and it really hasn't changed all that much. The policies have pretty much been in place the last 30 years. If I were to tell you what's going to happen under administration, I think that people who enter the United States on asylum, parole, or through the border, through any other mechanism, are in for a lot of trouble. I think that those people are going to be the ones that he's going to target the most. So I think people who came over on the border and claimed asylum and parole, I think those people are in for a rude awakening. I think, though, that people who are here on J's, EB3 unskilled, H-2B, for example, I think those people are going to be fine. I think H-1B, I think you're going to see a lot more requests for evidences. I think you're going to see a lot more questioning and grilling from the U.S. government, and probably a lot more denials. And so the process under a President Trump is just going to be a lot harder. As to who's going to win, only who knows, right? But if you ask me today, if the election were today, Trump would win.
Awesome.
If the election were today, he would win.
جاتشا. اوكي، سألت كريس عن الوضع السياسي الراهن والانتخابات الجايه في شهر نوفمبر، وسألته طبعا توقعه، ما حبيتش ان هو يقول لي هو هيرشح مين، ولكن توقعه لمين اللي هيكسب. وفي نهايه الاجابه بتاعته قال توقعه ان ترامب هو اللي هيكسب بناء على يعني المشهد السياسي الحالي. ولكن الاهم ان سألته بحكم وجوده في الوايت هاوس، هو بيزور الوايت هاوس كتير جدا وبيقعد مع بايدن والحكومه بتاعته علشان يكلموا عن مواضيع عقود العمل، وقال لي انه من 30 سنه من اول ما البرنامج ده تم إنشاؤه ما فيش حاجة اتغيرت بالحكومات المختلفة اللي مرت. يتوقع أن الموضوع هيمشي زي ما هو، في صعوبة شوية أن يحصل تعديلات في الكونجرس. توقعه أن لازم يجي بإكزيكتيف أوردر، يعني لازم يجي زي كده قرار جمهوري من الرئيس علشان الموضوع يتغير، ولذلك هم في تواصل مع الرئيس بشكل مباشر. والمعلومة المهمة أنه كلمنا عن 10,000 فيزا بيتم تحديدهم كل سنة للEB3 سواء كانوا البروفيشنالز أو العمالة الغير ماهرة، ولكن طبعًا ما بيقدروش إن هم يجيبوا العدد ده كل سنة، فلما السنة بتعدي السنة المالية بتقفل بتروح على الحكومة ما بتعرفش تستفيد بالفيز دي. فالسعي دلوقتي ان هم يحاولوا يرجعوا يعمل ريكابشر للفيز اللي بتاعت السنين اللي فاتت اللي ما تمش استعمالها خلاص، اللي اتركنت على جنب، عايزين يلموهم كلهم على بعض ويستعملوا الفيز اللي بقى الكتلة الجديدة اللي هتطلع دي علشان كل التأخير اللي حصل بسبب كوفيد من ال4 سنين اللي فاتوا يقدروا ان هم دفعة واحدة يغطوا كل الناس اللي مستنية. وطبعا في الأسئلة الجاية هنتكلم عن نشرة التأشيرات ونشوف التواريخ وصلت لغاية فين، ولكن طبعا كريس برضو أضاف ان ربما المشكلة الكبيرة في ظل انتخاب ترامب هي هتكون مع الناس اللي عدت من على الحدود بشكل غير قانوني وقدمت قضايا اللجوء، الناس اللي موجودة في أمريكا بشكل غير قانوني بشكل عام، وده كان توقعي بتفق معاه فيه جدا. كل حد موجود بشكل قانوني سواء على J1 سواء H1B أو EB3، أي حد موجود بشكل قانوني داخل أمريكا مش هيكون عنده أي مشكلة في ظل وجود ترامب أو بايدن. Can we talk a little bit about some of the available jobs right now? Can you give us maybe just a couple of examples of what is available for folks from the Middle East that they can start to think about?
Sure. I think that we have like a slew of jobs that are available. We have and we're really like trying to target and aim for fast food jobs, manufacturing jobs. We're looking at warehouse jobs, and we're really trying to do them all over the country. We're currently located, I think, in 38 states now, with jobs all over the place, and with more coming. And so, if you sign up on our website, you can get and see that list of like specific jobs and locations that we have. But whether it be rural or urban, the West Coast, the East Coast, we have jobs available all over the United States, and I'm excited about some of the jobs. I can't talk about them now, that we're going to hopefully announce in places like Florida, New York, in California. But I think that that's the great thing about BDV is that we're in all different types of industries and all different types of jobs.
سألت كريس عن ايه هي بعض الشغلانات او بعض العقود المتوفرة في الوقت الحالي، وقال لي طبعا ان هم شغالين. كريس, you're working with about 200 different employers around the nation, correct? At least that's
That's right. At least 200. That's right.
Right. فكريس قال لنا ان هم شغالين مع حوالي 200 شركة في الولايات المتحدة في 38 ولاية هتقدر انك تختار منهم، وبيزودوا العدد ده بشكل اسبوعي او شهري علشان يبقوا لهم الريادة بالفعل ويعتبر واصلين لكل الولايات. وقال لنا ان هو مش هيقدر يعلن يعني دلوقتي بشكل حصري لينا، ولكن شغال على حاجات في فلوريدا وحاجات في نيويورك. وقال انك لو دخلت على الويب سايت، وطبعا بفكر كل الاصدقاء ان الرابط بتاع BDV هيكون اول رابط في صندوق الوصف، اضغط على الرابط واملأ الاستمارة المبدئية، ما بتكلفكش اي حاجه، مجانا. خد كل المعلومات، شوف قائمه الوظائف المتاحه دلوقتي، لان الوظائف دي متغيره في انهي ولايه، مرتباتها قد ايه، الشغل فيها عامل ازاي. هم طبعا كل تركيزهم في عقود العمل للعماله الغير ماهره بتكون على الفاست فود، او اللي هي المطاعم اللي موجوده، او المحلات الجاس ستيشنز، او الوير هاوس، ان يبقى يعني بقى بتحط المنتجات في الباكسات وخلافه، وبيحاولوا يزودوا العدد الموجود بشكل يومي. ولكن ما تنساش تدخل على الويب سايت عشان تشوف ايه المتاح حاليا. I have a question related to the employers. We mentioned 200 of them that you're working with so far. Can you explain how can an employer wait 3 years until an employee, an immigrant, comes to the United States if the job is available today and they have the need for it today? How it doesn't sound so logical. Can you maybe just shed some light on how that works?
Sure. I think that it's hard for people around the world to kind of understand or grasp, but the United States has a huge, tremendous labor shortage, and a labor shortage that's just going to get worse as our older generations retire. And so we have a huge, like 60 million people in this called baby boomer generation, people who are working age that are about to retire or are retiring right now. And really, for a lot of the employers we talk to, yeah, they'll wait 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years because they just want to know that labor is coming, right? Like I think for a lot of them, they really struggle with labor. They plan on being in business in 3 to 4 years or 5 years. And they love that idea of knowing that they're going to have labor that's going to come down the road. And so it's really not as hard as you think it would be to convince employers to have this. And I think for a lot of them, they're struggling with how to manage their labor situation now. And they're thinking to themselves, well, as a business, we're planning for 3, 4, 5 years anyway. It's great that we're going to have this in the pipeline for the future.
سألت كريس طبعًا عن موضوع مهم جدًا، وهو إزاي حد مثلًا عنده شركة عايز يعيّن ناس وعنده طلب للعمالة ولازم ينتظر حوالي سنتين أو 3 لغاية أمّا العامل ييجي من البلد، وهو طبعًا متفهم للموضوع ده جدًا، وبيتكلم عن إن دي سياسة يا جماعة، ما هياش موقف فرداني من شركة واحدة أو محل واحد أو مكان واحد وخلاص، دي سياسة البلد، في 16 مليون وظيفة سيتم اللي شغالين فيها هيطلعوا معاش، لأنه زي ما سماهم البيبي بومرز الناس اللي بتطلع فوق سن المعاش، وفي تخوّف كبير في الاقتصاد الأمريكي من نقص حاد في العمالة في السنين اللي جاية، وبالتالي الشركات الكبيرة الfranchises الناس اللي عندها فروع كتير عايزين يأمنوا مستقبل العمالة بتاعتهم ل3، 4، 5، 10 سنين قدّام، عايز يبقى متطمن إن على طول في كده زي سير بتيجي عليه العمالة تشتغل 12 شهر أو سنة وتروح أنت بقى تشوف حياتك وييجي حد مكانك، ما يبقاش هو خلاص يعني فجأة فقد العمالة اللي كانت شغالة يدوّر بقى أو يضطر يقفل المحل وخلافه. فالموضوع هو في الحقيقة سياسة اقتصاد للبلد كلها، ما هياش مجرد محل أو 2. All right, Chris, I want to zoom in a little bit on the perm certification. Some of the folks who are working with you, when they start to choose a specific job to be able to sign the contract for, it typically tells them that the final date to file the perm certification for this specific job is 2-3 months down the line or in the future. Can you maybe shed some light on how that timeline is set? How is it that a specific job has a certain deadline to apply for with the Department of Labor?
Sure. And so the way the Department of Labor and the perm process works is that it's very, very timeline sensitive, right? And so after the prevailing wage is approved, you have a certain period of time where what's called the recruitment period goes stale, and you basically have to do the recruitment over again. And so remember in the beginning, I talked a little bit about, we have to go out and recruit Americans to make sure that no American wants the job. Well, we also have to make sure that we have the foreign national who's actually going to apply for the job as well. And if the foreign national, doesn't apply for that job in time, we have to basically start recruiting all over again. The labor certification itself is only good for a certain period of time, 6 months before as well. And so it's a very time sensitive operation. And it's very, very based on making sure that you get your application and documents in on time.
سألت كريس عن ساعات لما الناس بتختار وظيفة معينة بيقولوا لهم إن لازم في ديدلاين عشان تقدم على الموافقة بتاعة وزارة العمل البيرم سيرتيفيكيشن، فأنا حبيت أفهم الوقت ده بيتحدد على أساس إيه، وقال لي طبعا إن وزارة العمل is very time sensitive، يعني عندهم حساسية شديدة ضد الوقت، في زي كده فترة صلاحية للموافقة المبدئية اللي بتطلع في أول خطوة اللي هي بتاعة البريفيلينج ويج، لما بيحددوا ايه هو المرتب المناسب للوظيفة دي، بعديها لازم الناس تقدم في خلال 2-3 والا لازم يبداوا العملية من اول وجديد، لازم يبداوا يعلنوا عن الوظيفة دي لكل الامريكان ويعملوا انترفيوهات من اول وجديد. فالموضوع ببساطة يعني محدد بفترة صلاحية كل خطوة، كل خطوة بتقول لك لازم تقدم في خلال 2 أو 3 على حسب الخطوة دي، وبالتالي لازم انت تكون يعني مستجيب للطلبات بتاعتهم عشان تستفيد من الموقف، والا لو راح الديدلاين بتاع الوظيفة دي لازم يبداوا من اول وجديد وتنتظر يعني فترة انت في غنى عنها، وبالتالي لازم تكون سريع في التجاوب معاهم. Alright Chris, my last and final question for today is regarding the visa bulletin. I'm going to pull it up on the screen right now, and I would like you to maybe try to explain for folks a little bit what are those dates mean, the 2 different tables, table A and table B. What are the differences between the two? We're looking at the July 2024 visa bulletin, and the first table A, is the final action dates for employment-based preference cases. And obviously, we're going to focus on the first two columns because the rest of the table has to do with China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. Obviously, because a lot of people apply from those countries, so they kind of cap them a little bit. But for us, for everyone from the Middle East, they have to be concerned with only the first two columns. And let's look at the other workers with the date January 1st, 2021. Can you explain what that date means?
Sure. I'll start off by talking just a little bit about the visa bulletin. I know most people know about it, but there really is a cap on the number of visas that we have as a country every year. Congress puts that cap on there of 336,000. Of that 336,000, 140,000 are just dedicated to employment based, and within that 140,000, you have 10,000 that go to the other workers, right? And so what that means is that you have 10,000 that the USCIS and the State Department are able to give out 10,000 EB3 unskilled visas per year. But you have more people that want it than the actual numbers that are available. And so what Congress does is says, okay, well, then you have this visa bulletin that manages people and lets them know you have to wait from the following year and then the next year, et cetera, right? And so with that date of January 21st is saying, January 1st, 2021 is saying is that the people whose priority dates, the people who filed and have a priority date listed by the Department of DOL and then USCIS, they filed back in January 1st, 2021. Those people and the cases filed before that, they can get their green cards tomorrow. And so that's what the date of final action means. It means these are the people who right now in that long line of people, they can get their green cards at this moment. And so that's what that final action date means.
Perfect. Before we move to the second table, let me explain this one for the folks. سألت كريس عن نشرة التأشيرات والجدولين اللي موجودين فيها جدول A وجدول B. طبعا اللي احنا شايفينه على الشاشة دلوقتي ده جدول A اللي هو final action أو يعني القرار النهائي للفيز. وكريس شرح لنا انه طبعا في عدد معين من الجرين كاردز الإقامة الدائمة المتاح كل سنة من الحكومة الأمريكية. قال لنا عدد تقريبا 336,000 أو أيا كان، منهم حوالي 140,000 بيروحوا لعقود العمل، ومن ال 140,000 دول 10,000 بيروحوا للعمالة الغير ماهرة للأذر وركرز متاحين كل سنة. ولكن طبعا ربما العدد اللي بيقدم عليهم ممكن يكون أكتر من العدد المطلوب، وبالتالي بيعطلوا الموضوع شوية، وخصوصا إن كوفيد عطلت كتير من الناس اللي كانوا مقدمين. ولذلك احنا شايفين إنه التاريخ اللي موجود على الشاشة دلوقتي هو 1 يناير 2021، بمعنى إن كل الناس اللي قدمت قبل 1 يناير 2021 ممكن ياخدوا الجرين كارد بتاعهم بكره. الجرين كارد جاهز. لو انت مقدم قبل يناير 2021 انت الجرين كارد بتاعك فاينل اكشن، خلاص اخدت الاقامه الدائمه. ده الجدول الاولاني. وبالتالي بقول يعني الوقت بيجري بسرعه. لو انت عندك الفرصه وقادر تستفيد من البروجرام ده وقادر على تكلفه وخلافه وظهرك مش للحيط، يعني في بلدك معاك وقت تقدر تستغله، اوعى تتاخر، لانه السنتين او الثلاثه هيعدوا بسرعه وتلاقي نفسك جه عليك الدور وواخد الجرين كارد. Chris, let's move to the second table, which is titled Dates for Filing of Employment-Based Visa Applications. And the date here for other workers is January 8th, 2021. Can you tell us what does that mean?
Sure. And so, back in the mid 2000s, about 2014, 2015, USCIS decided to make these two charts in conjunction with the State Department, right? And so the purpose of Chart B is that you have a lot of people who are overseas at embassies and consulates. Their cases are kind of waiting on them to file their documents. A lot of them are like, you know what? I don't really want to file my documents right now, not until I know for sure that my visa interview is coming up. So the purpose of Chart B is to let people know, hey, if you're overseas case, hey, now is the time to go ahead and start filing and thinking about this, because by the time you file, your case should be ready to move from what's called the National Visa Center to the embassy, and then the embassy can go ahead and set up your interview date, right? And so Chart A is, hey, your visa is actually ready today to be issued. Chart B is to let the people know, hey, for you group of people, you should go ahead and reach out to your embassy and consulate. You should go ahead and reach out to NVC, give them all the documents now, because your visa is going to be up soon.
Yeah. Okay, does that mean then that the 7 days between the two tables, this is the period of time for those who can then file their documents because their interview is going to be within like 6 to 8 weeks, let's say?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
gotcha.
That's right.
اوكي
That's right.
سألت كريس عن الجدول الثاني، جدول بي اللي احنا شايفينه على الشاشة دلوقتي، واللي هو بعنوان dates for filing of employment based visa applications، والتاريخ اللي احنا بنبص عليه هو 8 يناير 2021. وده معناها انه اي حد مقدم قبل 8 يناير 2021، يعني بمعنى اصح في السبع ايام اللي ما بين الجدولين، الناس دي خلاص هيجي عليها الدور في المقابلة كمان 6 اسابيع او 8 بالكتير. قدم الدوكيومنتس او المستندات بتاعتك، اعمل الكشف الطبي، جهز كل امورك علشان خلاص المقابله جايه عليك الدور. Alright Chris, so we covered the visa bulletin. Now I want to ask you, from your experience, does really everybody fall within that visa bulletin? I heard from some folks that are working with you that the process may be actually a little faster paced than what's on the visa bulletin. For example, it didn't take them that long at the Department of Labor. It didn't take him 12 or 13 months. It took less than that. Same thing with USCIS. Is this like a worst case scenario for people? And in reality, it may actually be better than that. And what is your advice for folks who are just waiting on the sideline, thinking about it? What your basically, actionable advice be?
My advice is I've been in immigration for about 15 years. I've been in government and out of government. And my advice is always just to get in line. I think that, people look at this and they say, well, I want to wait on the sidelines for things to get better. But immigration changes so fast and rapidly. Sometimes it gets a little bit worse, but then suddenly the government does something that makes it tremendously better really, really fast, right? And so, for example, there was a huge retrogression backlog in 2014, 2015. The government went through an effort to reform its visa bulletin, and suddenly all the cases became current, right? And so the people that were already in line thinking, oh, I'm going to have to wait 4 or 5 years, suddenly they didn't have to wait that long at all. And that happened in the early 2000s. That happened in the 1990s as well. And so my advice is that you have no idea what the government is working on to improve situations. It's very possible that a President Trump can come in and say, you know what? I am going to pass immigration reform and I'm going to recapture all the cases and there's not going to be a visa bulletin anymore, right? Or I'm going to make all the cases current. That is a real possibility because America's labor shortage is just that dire that you could get a President Biden or a President Trump who says, you know what, I'm actually going to make this my thing to fix immigration. My recommendation is always that you should just get in line because it's also possible that things could become harder or they become difficult, or there might be a different kind of thing that might become more and more difficult. And you want to be in line and be protected in that way because the people who are in line for their benefits are going to be the ones protected, not the ones who are waiting on the sidelines for things to get better.
سألت كريس عن ايه هي نصيحته لكل الناس اللي يعني بيفكروا في الموضوع ومتخوفين انه بياخد فترة طويلة او يعني مش مضمون انه يحصل بسرعة وكده. ايه نصيحته للناس دي؟ وقال لي النصيحة المحددة والواضحة هي انه اقف في الطابور، لازم تكون انت جزء من الطابور، علشان من واقع تجربته وهو شغال في مواضيع الهجرة بقاله 15 سنة، ولكن متابع للموضوع طبعا من فترة في التسعينات في الألفينات في 2010 الفترة الزمنية دي بيحصل انفراجات. ممكن فجأة هوب تلاقي كل الناس بقت كارنت. ممكن يجي ترامب أو بايدن يقرر إنه نتيجة نقص العمالة، واللي هي المشكلة الحقيقية المحرك اللي وراء الموضوع ده كله، إن في شورتج أو نقص حاد في العمالة هو اللي بيحرك القطر ده بالكامل. فممكن يجي الرئيس الجاي فجأة يقول يا جماعة خلاص هنحل مشكلة العمالة دي، وكل الناس اللي واقفة في الطابور تجيبوهم على امريكا وتدوا لهم الجرين كارد. فانت ساعتها لو كنت واقف في الطابور ومعاك تذكره فيها رقم هيجي عليك الدور، لانه لما القانون بيتم سنه بيحصل على الناس اللي واقفين في الطابور بس، ما بيكلموش على المستقبل. بيقولوا مثلا اللي قدموا لغايه مثلا شهر كذا سنه كذا هم دول، كل اللي قدموا واقفين في الطابور هناخدهم ونعديهم بسرعه وتبقى البروسيس بتاعتهم طريقها سلك. فنصيحه كريس مره تانية هي انه بطل تقف على الخط وتراقب الموضوع، خلاص ادخل في الطابور، وحتى يعني ادفع الدفعه الاولانيه وعدي موضوع وزاره وزارة العمل علشان تبقى جاهز أول ما تحصل انفراجة في وزارة الهجرة والأرقام بقت كاتش اب، أو يعني يجي عليك الدور تكون جاهز أنت وأسرتك. Chris, thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you.
again. I know we're going to have more questions. We're going to need further clarification. So I always appreciate you having the patience for us. Thanks again for everyone who watched the episode. And please put your comments down below so that we can circle back. Any final words for us?
Nothing at all. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for this. This was a great event.
طبعا شكرت كريس جدا على انه اخذ الوقت وقضاه معانا. كل الناس اللي هيكون عندها اسئله اضافيه او عايزين استيضاح عن موضوع معين اكتبوه لنا في التعليقات تحت الفيديو ده. وبفكركم ان في قائمه تشغيل موجوده على القناه فيها 4 فيديوهات عن EB3، 4 لقاءات مختلفه عملتهم مع اكبر وسيط، الشركه اللي ليها الرياده، اضمن شركه. هتسمع اسامي شركات كتيره موجوده في امريكا وتيجي تسالني تقول لي هم دول نصابين، هم دول مش عارف ايه. في هي الشركه الوحيده اللي انا بأثق فيها، اللي انا بحط اسمي جنب اسمهم وبرشحهم بقوه لكل الاصدقاء المهتمين بموضوع الاي بي 3. تواصل معايا على الموقع بتاعي www.eijicast.com لو عندك اي استفسار، لو عايز اي استشاره عن موضوع الاي بي 3، لو عايزني اكون وسيط ما بينك وما بين BDV اقدر انه اساعدك. لو الانجليزي بتاعك تعبان شويه ما تقلقش، ادخل على التعليقات وسيب السؤال بتاعك. وما تنسوش كالعاده تدوسوا لايك وسبسكرايب، واشوفكم في الحلقه الجايه. سلام.